Hello, I'm Corey from Path of Friendship. Welcome back to another Mindful Mutt Moments. I have Bhakti here today and Bodhi, and I don't think you can see Cecil, but he's hanging out over there on the couch. So Mindful Mutt Moments, as if you've been following these, you know it's about taking a moment every day to just center ourselves, focus, be mindful, connect with the present moment, and experience the world the way our dogs experience it in at least one aspect of it, which is being focused on the present. So let's start just relax a little bit. Breath in, feel the breath coming out, feel the breath going in, the breath going out, experiencing it. Don't worry if you're thinking things in your head or you have all that kind of stuff. Just let that stuff go. Just let it go. Don't throw it out. Don't force it out. Don't block it from coming in. But let it come in, acknowledge it, and pass it. Because those are what's happening now. And this is the way our dogs experience things. They experience what's happening right now with our dogs. Bodhi's experiencing licking something on the couch right here. And Bhakti's just outside playing for a little bit, so they're both a little calmer right now. So in mindfulness, there's always a sort of a way of anchoring ourselves to the present, which is anchoring the feeling of our breath. And as you know, if you've been following, I like to anchor my connection with my dog. So I like to anchor how my dog feels under my hands, the sensations of their fur and their muscles and their bone structures and all those connecting. That's my mindful connection that I do when I want to share a mindful moment with my dog. And sharing these moments are a great way to enhance friendship, because we can't be friends with our dogs if we don't understand each other. And understanding is not just a spoken language. Understanding is experiencing things on the same level. But sometimes, when we experience things, we don't always agree on it. Oop, there goes Bhakti. There she goes. Oh, and by the way, this brings up something. When you're doing these mindful moments, we never force our dogs to do this. It's their choice. They have to want to be here with us. If they're not, that's fine too. But sometimes what happens when we are friends, we're going to get into conflicts. And I know we may have spoken about this. But there's times where we're not going to agree. So there might be times where Bodhi decides that he wants to bark at the television there's another dog on there. And there may be times where I don't want him to bark at the television. And we're going to have these disagreements here. And I think part of resolving conflicts with our friends is being very, very clear on communication. So often we fall back on training our dogs not to do something. So if Bodhi's barking at the TV, should I train him not to? Now, what's training involved? Most training is a form of control. Training is involved in either using intimidation or dominance, do this or else, or training is involved in behavioral manipulation. They call it behavioral modification, or positive methods. If you do something else, I'll give you this treat. And both of those are extrinsic types of motivations for our dogs. It takes them away from the relationship and gives them an exterior or an extrinsic reason to do something with that. And the problem that I have with that is it does nothing to connect the relationship itself. So if I'm using threats to stop Bodhi, then he's more concerned about the threats than about how I feel. If I'm using bribes or rewards for Bodhi, he's more concerned about what's in it for him to get rather than his connection with me. So in being mindful and being connected with our dogs, it's really about effective, compassionate communication. So we form this intrinsic motivation, this intrinsic bond to want to do things for each other based on consideration for each other's feelings. Yeah, dogs can have that, without a doubt. They can have that. Bodhi can be considerate of my feelings and I can be considerate of his. if we know how each other's how we feel. How do I know how Bodhi feels? Well, he's very expressive. As most dogs are, we can sort of read how they feel. And I know we can open a book and read all the different technical aspects of reading their body language, but you know what? Put all that stuff aside, because your own dog, you know how your dog feels. You have that gut feeling. Even though they may not be displaying the ears back or all this stuff, you'll know exactly how your dog feels. So you can use those technical things sort of as a loose guide, but if you use that instead of your gut feeling when it comes to your own dog, you're really missing out on the connection there. So when you want to communicate, your dog wants to communicate with you and you want to receive that communication, you know them. And the more you spend these mindful moments together connecting with them on that level without being outside and somewhere else in your head, the more you're going to solidify and entwine that connection so you can really read them and understand how they feel. What about the other way around? How do my dogs know how I feel? Well, there's a lot of thought on this. Part of what I want to do as friends, I want to make sure that Bodhi knows how I feel. And how else is he going to know how I feel about something unless I tell him? So I remember once I met somebody who was very involved in a lot of training, and this is when I was first starting out, and they said, never show your emotions to your dog. And, being brand new and young and not knowing, I said, okay, it didn't make sense to me, but I should do that. Well, I've changed a lot since then, and I disagree with that entirely. I think it's very important that we are honest and we tell our dogs and show our dogs how we feel, with a couple of conditions on this, which we'll talk about in a minute. But to try to lie to them or to try not to show our emotions, how are we going to be connected unless Bodhi knows how I feel? How is he going to want to change that? How is he going to want to connect to me? If he doesn't know that I'm happy, or more likely, if he doesn't know that I'm upset that he's doing something, how is he going to learn not to do it? Not learn not to do it. How is he going to learn to care enough to not make me upset? I think it's very important. Honesty is critical in the friendship and the connection to have with your dogs. And when we're mindful, we have to be honest about it because we are in that moment and we're feeling this. Now, with that said, while we're being honest, while I'm communicating to Bodhi how I feel, at the same time, I have to understand his feelings there too. And so if I am upset with something, if I'm not happy with something, and I rage and I go crazy, and it makes him afraid and it makes him panic, well then I wasn't taking his feelings into consideration. All I cared about was telling him mine. So there is this two-way street. I have to care as much about how I'm affecting him as how he's affecting me. So there's a way of thinking about this. And there's a thing where I say it's sort of above and below. And if you imagine two parallel lines, one on top here and one on the bottom. And in the middle, in this space, is where effective communication and compassionate communication takes place. What do I mean by compassionate and effective communication? It means that when I'm telling Bodhi something, he understands just how I feel and can process it and can make decisions based on that. If I go too high, if I go above that top line, remember there are two lines there, and so the middle is the safe zone, the effectiveness zone, the compassionate zone. If I go too high, then what happens is, let's say in the case of anything unpleasant, it may get him to be afraid or nervous, and he may go into panic or fear, in which case the communication is no longer effective. There's no way to process panic. There's no way to sort of integrate it into ourselves. So I've gone too high above that. If I go too low, then I never really got the message through either. And so every dog has this effectiveness zone space where communication is just right. You can think of this kind of like the Goldilocks effect, right? You don't want to go too hot, you don't want to go too cold, you want to go just right. And just right means they understand what you're telling them, they can process it, and then they can make decisions based on that, rather than being too afraid or not getting it at all. Now, for some dogs, there's a big zone there and you have lots of leeway. Other dogs, it's a very narrow one. You have very little leeway. And especially dogs who are a little more emotionally challenged or fragile, then you have to be very, very careful with this. Other dogs are just everything rolls off them. You have a greater place to go, bigger width. And that's not stagnant either. That changes moment to moment to moment. So depending on the communication, it'll always change. And part of our job as friends is to constantly get feedback from them. Is my communication effective enough? Is what I'm telling them, is he getting the message? Or am I being too much or too little? Am I being compassionate that I'm considerate of his feelings? Or am I expecting him to just know what I'm thinking? No. Part of the communication is to learn to have it, as much as we're giving it out, we're getting it back. That constant interplay, that constant feedback going back and forth. Dangling a treat in front of him isn't going to do that unless there's a specific reason I'm doing that. Threatening to punish him is not going to do that. It's this communication as friends where we respect each other. And this can only happen on an equal level, when we're equal as friends. And the only way we can be equal is to share some of these moments that we are in the same space. I need to understand how Bodhi perceives. I need to get into his world a little bit. I can never get in there completely, but to get in a little bit, I can be mindful about it and connect at these times. It builds enormous amounts of trust. So when the communication comes, I'm so aware of how my communication to him is affecting him, and he becomes really aware of how his communication to me is affecting me. He learns to read me as much as I learn to read him. And that's a very important part of deepening the friendship between us and our dogs. So it's something that we should really think about, and it's kind of a skill that we can learn, but it's also a skill that we've had inside us our whole lives. As children, most children communicate absolutely fine with dogs, and dogs get it with them. You've seen it, you've done it. Along the way, we've learned where we put layers upon layers and separated ourselves further. So part of these mindful moments is getting back to that so that communication can flow, have that back and forth flow naturally the way it's supposed to be. And it is supposed to be that way with humans and dogs. It's a friendship that's part of our DNA, part of our makeup, and part of their DNA and their makeup too. So being mindful with our dogs is about great communication, compassionate communication, and learning to be friends and to resolve problems by basically not talking it out, but communicating it out. So take another moment here. Breathe in, breathe out. And remember, just connect with your dog, be present with him, turn the TV off, turn me off, turn all these things off, and really seek them and be with them in that moment. The greatest gift you can give your dog is the totality of your presence. That's a sort of a modification of a quote that was once said, but it really is the best thing we can do for our dogs and the best thing we can do for ourselves. So until next time, I'll see you. Thanks for tuning in.